Welcome to Late Night Thoughts with Renoa. So, I've been thinking a lot about what I would call, and I would like to introduce you guys to, heirloom technology. So, heirloom technology would be something that has, at least I would say, mostly three things. One, it is a technology which lasts a very, very long time. Two, it does not need repairing for the most part. And then three, it retains its value in the eyes of people. So, there are a few things that already fit that list, such as hammers. Hammers almost never need repairing. You can find one on the side of the road and then use it for the rest of your life. However, you could also make it even more of an heirloom technology where if you had, say, a cermet head that never oxidized and then have like a fiberglass type handle made of carbon fiber, that would last even longer. That would be, you would have to burn it to get rid of it. But there's a lot of things which could be heirloom technologies if only we kept interested in them, because technology in general is starting to last a lot longer, and things that are heirloom technology are disguised as things that aren't conveniently disappearing. For instance, televisions. If you don't get rid of a television now and again, you'll end up like me and have 45 televisions piling up in your workshop. Now, I happen to like that because I foresee a future where televisions are worth a good amount if they're still in working order. But it wasn't always the case to have televisions just piling up, because everybody has. I can bet you that you, the listener, have probably gotten rid of an old television or have one in your basement or have one in your garage or something. They just stick around, and it used to not be the case. So let's drag it back a little bit. Televisions, for the most part, were first produced in the 1940s in limited numbers, and those were not going to last very long. They probably last, like, most of those probably only lasted about 5 or 10 years. And I would say that probably the 10-year lifespan for television most likely held even up to televisions produced in the 1960s. Because even then, you would have to be replacing parts almost constantly. Like every year, you'd have to replace a tube or something. And so televisions had a much shorter lifespan and they were much more difficult to keep going. You had to have an infrastructure to produce the new parts for them, and they had to be serviced and repaired. The tubes would burn out. The CRTs, the filaments would go. They get oxidized. The flyback transformers would melt. Just all sorts of things. The resistors would split open, although that would take a lot longer. So we ended up in the 1970s where we had been producing televisions for decades in the millions, and yet most people didn't have two televisions, as far as I can tell. And that's because it reached a point where the number of televisions being produced mostly kept up with the number being thrown away, which was a real shame. But then the solid state revolution happened, and well, those televisions just really started lasting a lot longer. We had the more modern, potted flyback transformers instead of the ones made of beeswax. And, well, that's why by the 1990s, you started having a house with, like, the old television was in the back room, and then the television before that was in the basement or whatever. And so people would have two or three televisions. By the 2000s, people had four televisions because, well, they had more televisions than they really needed. And now we're to the point where we have flat screens, which, truth be told, there are a lot of ways for flat screens to break. And I have seen a lot of them just up and die. But for the most part, boy, do they last. Like my monitor for my computer, the 6 monitors that I've had, they're still kicking. Even my NEC, no, not a ViewSonic, my NEC, whatever it is, from 2003, is working fine, even though if I leave an image up onto it for too long, it does burn into it, but then you let it sit for a week and it's gone. So it's just unbreakable pretty much. I don't want to test it because I really like that thing. So now we're in the point where people really, they don't quite have the love for the televisions. However, the prices are coming up online and people are starting to collect them. So someday they might actually become heirloom technology, and we might reach the point where the televisions show their limitations. Because right now, I've not really had too many issues with a television made past 1985 or so. I mean, I've found them on the side of the road and gotten them for free, and they just work. They might have obvious capacitor issues, but I won't have to really replace those for another decade or so. I can just adjust the tuners or the settings. So then, of course, my thought goes to how we have a lot of good candidates for heirloom technology. The main thing that's lacking is the human will, the human interest, I guess you could say. Because things such as computers and televisions definitely last long enough. However, they're rendered obsolete by newer technology, or they're not quite as capable as they could have been. For instance, my computer from 2016 has showing no signs of having any issues. I bet that thing's going to last me until the 2030s. And then recently I dug out my gaming computer from 2012 that the only reason I replaced it was because I didn't feel like taking it out to California. And it games perfectly fine still. It's almost a decade old, and yet now I realize I have two computers that really don't have any differences and perfectly useful. But when I think back to my other computers, I still have my original computer. Well, sorry, my second computer. It was a Packard Bell running Windows 95, and then we upgraded to Windows 98. And it works fine, but boy, is it useless. I remember even thinking back then, I wish I could do a lot more with this. I wish I could, like, go into the 3D universe or something, but back then I could only really use it for a few games, Microsoft Paint, and then messing with sound files. It's kind of it. And it's a real shame that we can't find a good modern use for those computers. It's really difficult. Now, a computer made past 2011 or so with an Intel i3 or i5 could be used as a parsec machine. Like my laptop, I realize it's no longer quite as fast as I want it to be, but it has more than enough capability to remote into my desktop, which has the capability. So I've started to use my ThinkPad X260 just to remote into my gaming machine, and now it's like I have an Intel i7 and a big for 2016 uh, NVIDIA GTX 960 in there, and as the only requirement is that my ThinkPad can handle parsec and keep the latency down in the encoding and or de-encoding the video, so I can pretend like that other computer is this computer. Now, I do think that the chances of finding a good home for old technology in this kind of day and age when everything's changing is pretty difficult. But I see a lot of good things coming because, well, do you really see yourself moving past 1920 by 1080 screens? I don't see myself moving past it that much, at least not to where a 1080p screen would just be horribly obsolete, because you could still have a wonderful movie watching experience on a 1080p screen probably until like 2030 or 2040, if not longer. And so that technology is kind of past that curve where things are changing quickly. I don't imagine us really going to 8K displays anytime soon. So maybe it's just that we're in a very odd time where things change a lot. kind of like automobiles were a long time ago. That's another thing that's become more reliable, and now we just have them kind of piling up. It used to be that cars would die after like 4 or 5 years, but now they're lasting 10, 15, 20 years. And then with electric cars, we'll have cars that are lasting 40 or 50 years without much maintenance. We just have to make sure that we keep human interest as this technology sticks around. That's the real problem. Because humans are really good at making things. Really good at making things. We've solved the production issues on many stuff and many things. But we're not really good at using the stuff we make